What is up, though, Lions fans? It's your boy, Chef. We are back, and you already know what time it is. It is time for episode number 42 of the YAK pod. Now, I was going to talk about some other things like the kick rule and the changes, and it's pretty exciting stuff if you think about all the options that we have going forward, but I am going to save that for tomorrow because I watched that damn Brad Holmes press conference. That man was cooking. So we're going to get into that, but before we get into that, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and subscribe. Hit that little button down there, turn on your notifications, smash the like button, share, and it helps me get the algorithm on my side. And if you are enjoying this content, you want the algorithm on my side. Now let's go ahead and get right to it. I told you previously that Brad Holmes is sharing a little bit of the secret sauce because Brad Holmes be cooking. I mean, it's my goal one day to get Brad Holmes on my podcast because he cooks just like I do. Brad Holmes is a secret chef, just like me. Well, I'm not really secret, right? Because I'm out here in my stuff every day. But the point is, there's a person. We're talking about secret sauce, and his name is Sauce. Brandon Sausner, I believe his name is. He's one of the contract guys. So he talked about how they are very collaborative, as I said before, throughout the year, man. It's not just, see, us fans, we come to free agency and we're like, oh, this guy's available and this guy's available. And then we start, running through rumors and start trying to find tweets or posts, whatever they want to call them these days. And we start trying to kind of piece together these little boards. But they've already had their board. They've been working on it. So it's not something that they wait until the end of the season to start doing. No, they start this during the season. I mean, if you look at the Kevin Zeitler deal, he was like, basically, I mean, we saw how advanced he was and how good of a lineman he was when he played against us. And then it was like, okay, now towards the end of the season, we go back and we looked at all of his stuff and he was sustaining. The thing, obviously, with Kevin Zeitler is he's a little bit older, and he was like, older players sometimes, they fall off or whatever. But he was like, no, he sustained that throughout the season. So that was a deal that they were excited to get done. He talked about the DJ Reader deal. I mean, and just like I said, he talked about how he's going to impact the entire defense. And everyone who knows anything about football knows that if you have a dominant defensive line, that impacts the second level of your defense, which is your linebackers, and it impacts the third level of the defense, which is the secondary. So he also mentioned, for all of the DJ Reader is not a pass rusher haters out there, he also mentioned, he said, not only did I already understand that he was great against the run, but I was watching the film and there was some pass rush ability there. He's going to push the pocket and he's going to get to the passer and make him uncomfortable, get him off of his spot. He's either going to get sacks, he's either going to rush throws, things of this nature. So all of these things he was talking about with DJ Reader. So that's another thing. And then he talked about talking to DJ Reader's agent at the combine, and he was like, oh, he's gonna love playing with Aiden Hutchinson. And he was like, oh, we got Lee McNeil too. And he said, oh, like I forgot about Lee McNeil. So he's like, man, when we put this dude in between Lee McNeil and Aiden Hutchinson, whoo, I mean, that's just And his agent also had the same. He also had that same thing going on. So now when the agent goes back and he's pitching the Detroit Lions to DJ Reader, and I already said that DJ Reader was a fan of the Detroit Lions last season. When he goes back and he starts talking to him about it, it's just like, man, like, getting the goosebumps and all that stuff. So I mean, Brad Holmes was absolutely cooking at this press conference. I mean, if you're listening to him speak, he's giving you the secret sauce. I don't think he will ever give you exactly the application of the secret sauce. I don't think that's going to happen because why would a GM show his hand like that? But he did give us a lot of little tidbits about the situation. And then going also to the defensive line, one of the things that he said, you know, when he talked about injured players, he said, okay, there's this thing that happens when we have a player who's on our roster already, and then he gets injured, because he was talking about Emmanuel Mosley. He spent a little bit of time talking about Emmanuel Mosley and his injury luck and all these things, and his philosophy about injured players and all these things. And we're going to get to all that. But he said, when you have a player on your team, on your roster, and then he gets injured, it's like fans forget that that player is on the team sometimes, right? And obviously the significance of the injury, you're just kind of thinking about, well, what will his impact be when he gets back? Some people just forget that he's there all, you know, because he's missed like the entire season. But he mentioned James Houston. He was like, James Houston is still on the roster now. No, you know, when he got all those sacks, everyone was so excited about him. But now, because he missed the season due to an injury, people forgot about it. He said, no, he's still on the roster. He's coming back. You know what I mean? So what does that tell you? When he says that, that means that Brad Holmes is high on James Houston. So anyone that's not high on James Houston, and anybody that thinks that James Houston is on the roster bubble or whatever the case may be, they were just tinkering with his role. Like I said, at Florida, he played outside linebacker. He played with his hand off the ball. He played standing up. That was his position, right? The pass rusher thing, as I said, came along with Deion Sanders telling him that if you want to make it in the NFL, you are going to be a pass rusher because you have a gift. This is what Coach Prime told him. So when you come in and you see all those sacks, like I said, he had 19 sacks at Jackson State, and I know it's a SWAC, but he had 19 sacks in the season. Let's not forget about that. So Brad Holmes is still excited. There wasn't a situation where James Houston wasn't able to get on the field. Obviously, they were just trying to see if they could expand his role at the NFL level to something that which is just beyond the pass rusher. And he obviously talked about Marcus Davenport. So now if those guys can stay healthy, man, I mean, you've got Aiden Hutchinson, DJ Reader, Aleem McNeil, James Houston, and Marcus Davenport. We know Marcus Davenport is a beast. We know he had 9 sacks in 11 games. We all know that, but we know that his injury issues are a problem. And this is where we will talk about what Brad Holmes had to say about injured players. Basically, he said, there is an injury risk in football. It doesn't matter. There is an injury risk in football. If you have a player that hasn't missed any games, but you don't really like that player, you can't get excited about acquiring that player. It's like you're not just going to go out and acquire him just because he hasn't missed any games. Because at the end of the day, he could not have missed a single game. He could have had a 2, 3, 4, 5-year career. His free agency, hasn't missed a single game, hasn't missed a single snap. And then one play happens, and it doesn't even have to be in a game. It could be in practice. One play happens, and you've lost that player for the season. You've lost that player for half the season. You've lost that player for multiple weeks, whatever it may be. So he said just because a player has been injured and he has missed a few games here and there, doesn't mean that we're going to stay away from him. Because if we're excited about that player, like they're excited about Emmanuel Mosley. Now, the Emmanuel Mosley situation, he chalks up to bad injury luck. Hey, the science and the medicine, and they just overhauled their medical team, but the science and the medicine is so much better than it was 15, 20 years ago, where if a player tore an ACL, it seemed like maybe his career was over. Maybe he would have to come and switch positions, especially if it was later in his career. If he was a cornerback and he tore ACL or whatever, then he might have to switch to safety and all these things. But those days are gone, right? Those are not the current times that we have right now. So now when he's talking about Emmanuel Mosley and his rehab process, and they said there was a reason that we brought Emmanuel Mosley back, because we're comfortable where he is in his rehab process, and we're comfortable with him going through it again. Now he's He is more comfortable. He is more comfortable in the rehab process. He knows what he has to do. And he can make tweaks if he has to make any tweaks. He said he didn't think that he really had to make any tweaks. But with talking with him and talking with the medical staff, he was comfortable bringing him back. And let's just hope that his injury luck, or whatever you call it, doesn't, rear its ugly head again. And then we have that guy. So this is basically like his philosophy with injured players. Let me say it again to you. If we're excited about a guy who plays a sport where injury is guaranteed, we're going to bring that guy in. The other guy who plays the same sport where injury is guaranteed but has not been injured, but you're not excited about, you're not going to bring him in. You're not going to add him to the roster because you don't believe that he can help your roster as much as the guy who's injured. And this is where the depth comes into play. So all of the work that they do throughout the season with free agents and all these other things, this is what goes into all of that process. So this is fantastic information that he's giving us. He's just giving us the sauce. We just have to take it and apply it. Now, some other things that he talked about. He talked about the pro days. Now, listen to what he said about the pro days. He said, he didn't have a chance to make it to Michigan because it was the same week as Alabama. Now, obviously, because he's not a scout anymore, he doesn't get a chance to go to them. But he said this. He said, Michigan, Ohio State. I went to the first game, the first Michigan, Ohio State game this year. So that was great. Obviously, he's talking about his experience. But he didn't get to go to any Alabama games this year. And he said, with Michigan, I saw those players play live. I saw them playing on the field. So he's like, I don't really take too much stock in the workouts. He was like, yeah, you can check a few things off. He said, but I saw these guys play live. So again, that whole combine thing that we were talking about before, and the underwear Olympics, and is it important, and blah, 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 blah. It's important to some, but to our GM, that's not the thing that's going to sell him. It's going to maybe check off a box here or there. Maybe a guy plays slower than what his 40 time is, or maybe a guy plays faster than what his 40 time is, and that helps you to check off certain boxes about athleticism or whatever the case may be. But the thing is, Alabama has a lot of prospects, so he wanted to go there and check them out because he hasn't been able to see them play in person. Now, obviously, playing in person, if we remember what he said about a guy named Jahmyr Gibbs, he went to the Alabama-Tennessee game to look at somebody else. And this Jahmyr Gibbs guy, the electrician, just jumped off of the stage. He was just like, who is that? And that led to Jahmyr Gibbs being picked number 12 overall. And right now it looks like it was a damn good pick. Right now it looks like Brad Holmes cooked on that pick. So there were a lot of things, man. There were a lot of things that he was talking about. He talked about what are some other things? I mean, there were so many things. It was like a 30-minute press conference. So I'm just doing everything from memory, and the things that stood out to me the most. The Carlton Davis thing and Amik Robertson and the Cam Sutton situation. All right. So basically, as I've been saying, okay, I've been speculating that the Cam Sutton situation did not directly affect the plan that they have for free agency in the draft. Now, that is something that it's kind of conflicting reports, because if you looked at what Dan Campbell said, Dan Miller put out some notes. If you guys don't know who Dan Miller is, he's the play-by-play voice for the Detroit Lions. But Dan Miller put out some notes on Twitter about his conversations with Dan Campbell. And Dan Campbell said that there's a little bit more urgency now to sign another cornerback. So I think that maybe Brad Holmes is being a little bit coy because, Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes, they're always on the same page. And whenever a player is brought in, it has the stamp of approval from both of these men. Brad Holmes is not that type of GM who's going to be like, well, I want these players and I'm getting them and give them to the coach and I don't care. You just coach them. Just do your job. He's not that kind of guy. It's a very collaborative effort. So he talked about that situation with Carlton Davis and Amik Robertson. He knew that Carlton Davis might be available because he knew that there were going to be some cornerbacks coming available in Tampa Bay because the contracts and all these things, and they had to get, move on, and some things were going to be going away. So he reached out and they got that done. So he wasn't exactly sure if they were going to be able to get Amik Robertson. Now, here's the thing that we have to understand. Remember, Brad Holmes was a college scout, okay? Before he got this job, he was a college scout. He said Amik Robertson is a guy that he liked coming out of college. He did a lot of work on him. How many years ago was that? Was it 4 years? So now we're looking at, remember, Brad Holmes has all this information 4 years in advance. He's done work on guys. He's scouted guys. The last crop of guys that came out 4 or 5 years ago, he has mental Rolodex of these players. And when they become available, if he liked them when he was a college scout in LA, there is a very good chance that player will be a Detroit Lion, or at least they will kick the tires on said player to see if they can get a deal done or not. So this is a gem. This is another gem that Brad Holmes has given us. He's giving us a look inside of his mind and inside of his process. So they said that they weren't really sure if they were going to be able to absorb the contract of Carlton Davis and also get Amik Robertson. But they were able to do it because the guy that I talked to you about earlier in the episode, that guy named Brandon Sosner, along with Mike Disner, these are the contract gurus, and these are the people that handle the money. So he said that the collaboration, because they do it all season, not just in the off season, because they do it all season. This Brandon Sosner and Mike Disner already pretty much know what they're thinking. They know the kind of cap space that they have and how that they want to maneuver and the types of players that they're looking for. So it's a really, really collaborative effort. He obviously called this the best free agency haul that they have gotten since they've been here, because they were able to go plan A, plan A, plan A, plan A. It wasn't like, all right, well, this is plan A, couldn't get that, got to go to plan B, couldn't get that, got to go to plan C. No, he said that stuff wasn't happening this free agency period. So I'm not exactly 100% sure if, and this is something hard for me to say because I am the biggest Stephon Gilmore fan. If you want to connect the dots to Xavier Howard being in Miami when Dan Campbell was in Miami, and Xavier Howard talking about wanting to take less money or being willing to take less money to go to a contender and being able to make it work in Detroit, even though it's cold. Now, he might be on the radar. But again, as I said, Brad Holmes plays a little bit coy in this situation. I do believe that they will add another cornerback, especially with Dan Campbell saying that there's now some urgency to add another cornerback before the draft. But then Brad Holmes said that he doesn't think that there's been a draft that he hasn't at least taken a guy. He said you can never have enough cornerbacks. So they're probably going to draft and they're going to sign some UDFAs that are cornerbacks. Are we going to make another free agency signing? Obviously, it depends on how the money stacks up. I really, really, really want Stephon Gilmore on this team, man. I think that would just pretty much solidify the secondary. We can bring in a rookie. We can bring in some UDFAs, and, you know, they can compete for depth. I mean, it would be a fantastic situation. But again, as I said, Brad Holmes is pretty much unmoved about the Cam Sutton situation because he is confident in Carlton Davis and Amik Robertson. Now, Dan Campbell said that Carlton Davis, his Rolodex with him goes back to the fact that he was in New Orleans. He was in the division. He played against Carlton Davis twice a year. He said that there were things that he could do to lock down a certain side of the field, and this is something that we haven't had in Detroit since we've been here. And he's absolutely right. They haven't had a corner who could be a lockdown at any time. Not just, I mean, if Carlton Davis is a lockdown corner who can make a side of the field unavailable 25% of the time, if he can do that once in every 4 games, or if he can do that once in every 3, or once in every 6 games, that's not something that we've had here. So obviously, you know, Dan Campbell was like, we weren't trying to throw at Carlton Davis, you know, when we were in when I was in New Orleans. And then obviously we played him twice this past season, played him once during the regular season and once in the playoffs. So he has that respect for Carlton Davis, and he has that understanding of what Carlton Davis can do. And obviously, Brad Holmes scouted Carlton Davis coming out of Auburn. He liked Carlton Davis. He knew what he could do. He understood his skill set because he did the work on him coming out of college. Look, man, Brad Holmes is giving up the gems. He's giving up the gems. I mean, just go and listen to this man speak. Go and watch the press conference with Brad Holmes. Every time Brad Holmes has a press conference, just watch it. You don't just watch it. I mean, if you want information about how the Detroit Lions roster is constructed, about the things that they're thinking about the work that they're doing, oh guys, just watch Brad Holmes. He's going to tell you. He's going to tell you. He talked about the draft. He said, listen, man. And as I speculated before, when I said this Cam Sutton thing, I don't want this Cam Sutton thing kind of creeping into the mind of Brad Holmes. No, nothing is creeping into the mind of Brad Holmes. The only thing that's creeping into the mind of Brad Holmes is best player available. Best player available. That's it. That's all he's concerned about. He said, I've told you guys, I've talked openly about the fact that this free agency period, that's when you go and you take care of your needs. And he was like, everybody's like, oh, it's a need, it's a need, it's a need. He said, that's where you get in trouble. You get in trouble reaching for guys in the draft that you believe is a need, instead of taking the best player available, because you're going to pass up on a lot of elite players or difference makers when you do things of that nature. And we see people do it every year. We see a guy reach, or we see a team reach for a guy, and you're like, what was that? Why did this team pick that particular player? And I know a lot of people did it last year when we picked everybody except for Brian Branch. How'd that work out? Worked out pretty well for the Detroit Lions. I mean, we were in the NFC Championship game, 30 minutes away from going to the Super Bowl, but that's neither here nor there. So these are just a treasure trove of gems that Brad Holmes gave up when he was at the owner meetings talking just today. That was just today, you know, a few hours ago. So, man, if you haven't watched that press conference, go watch the press conference, because I'm pretty sure that I left some things out, because I was just, man, I was like a kid in a candy store, man, just soaking up all the stuff that Brad Holmes had to say. And I mean, it was very informative. It helps people like me. It helps, you know, the regular fans. It helps everybody, man, just to get into the mind of this GM, who is widely regarded as the best GM that the Lions have had is in 3 years. In 3 years, this man is the best GM that the Lions have had. I don't remember the GM that was there when we picked Barry Sanders. But the Barry Sanders pick, I think, because I'm a huge Barry Sanders fan, and I've told you this before, I think that was the best pick in the history of the Detroit Lions. However, that pick was made for us because the Green Bay Packers botched that pick and they picked Tony Mandrich. Why? Because they needed a lineman and they reached for a guy who turned out to be meh. And Barry Sanders drops right into our laps. So this guy right here, Brad Holmes, notwithstanding, I mean, I think some other craziness happened with Calvin Johnson as well, where Matt Millen told Al Davis not to draft Jamarcus Russell. And he drafted him anyway, because I guess he was like, this dude's telling me not to draft somebody. Matt Millen. Matt Millen? Matt Millen's telling me not to draft somebody? Oh, I'm drafting him. You know what I'm saying? Because Matt Millen don't know what the hell he's talking about. And then, Calvin Johnson was there at number 2. So the maneuvering that this guy is doing, the only pick I would say that you could say someone fell into our laps was Penei Sewell. That's it. Because, teams were taking who they wanted to take, like Jamar Chase being drafted instead of Penei Sewell, obviously because Joe Burrow, that was his college quarterback. Hey, it would be a great idea to pair them together. And it worked out to this point, but, obviously Joe Burrow was injured last season, so, they didn't really make it too far. But it has been working. So, like I said, man, just go ahead and watch the press conference. Whenever you see that Brad Holmes is giving a press conference, you need to be watching it. Whenever you see that Dan Campbell is giving a press conference, you need to be watching it, because these are the two men that are in charge. Now, it's a collaborative effort, but everyone else behind the scenes, these two men are the mouthpieces. These two men are the mouthpieces. I mean, Dan Campbell was giddy about the DJ Reader signing because, he's a football coach. He played football. He knows what a DJ Reader is going to do. He knows better than all of us what DJ Reader is going to do for this defense, and giving the ability to AG to be able to call some of the things that he wants to call when you have a guy like a Carlton Davis and you have a guy like Amik Robertson. That's the other thing that I forgot to say about Amik Robertson. The Brad Holmes said, he did work on him when he was coming out of college, and then when you looked at him in the pros, and he played a lot of nickel, but when he was able to slide outside this year and do admirably, he was like, this is a guy that was just, we wanted him. He was on our radar. And fortunately, they were able to go and get him. So, again, this cornerback situation, it's been a strange one. It's been a strange one, especially with all this Cam Sutton stuff. But, man, what a time to be alive. What a time to be a Detroit Lions fan. And just let Brad Holmes cook. Anyway, that is the time that I have for today. As always, subscribe, share, be the type of friend that shares with another friend. Let them know what's going on here in this kitchen. Smash the like button. On your way out, just smash it. If you haven't smashed it, if you didn't smash it on the way in, smash it on your way out. Just smash the like button. Smash it like it did something to you. And as always, I will see you next time. Peace.